Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Legion video. So, if you'll bear with me, today I'd like to show you how the Guardian Druid is going to be working out in Legion. To do that, I'm first going to go over the very basic abilities, then a more complete look at abilities, then I'll cover talents, and finally after that we'll be looking at the Claws of Ursoc, which are the artifact weapon for this spec. So, how does this work and has it changed much? Well, they've changed it so that it's less of an agility tank and more of a tank that is based off just having a lot of health and a lot of armour. You've got 6 forms of defensive cooldown, 4 of which are active mitigation, and a decently extensive DPS toolkit. Your main resource is rage. You start off at 0 rage and you generate rage by fighting things, so if I right click on a target, you'll see that as I swipe it, and hopefully as I take damage as well, I will be generating rage. Lovely stuff. Rage is also generated by Mangle. So Mangle is a 6-second cooldown which does 25,000 physical damage and reduces the target's movement speed by 50% for 12 seconds. It also deals 20% additional damage against bleeding targets and generates 10 rage. So you can see there, your main ability which generates rage has a 6-second cooldown, though of course you will be generating more rage from your auto attacks. So it said there that it does additional damage to bleeding targets. Well, let's have a look at Lacerate. Lacerate is a 2.8 second cooldown. You lacerate the enemy target, dealing 6,000 bleed damage and an additional 6,000 bleed damage over the next 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. So that'll be a total of like in and around 18,000 damage over 15 seconds once it's up to 3 stacks. Lacerate has a 25% chance to reset the cooldown on Mangle. Now note, that is not ticks of Lacerate. That is actually using Lacerate. So you always want to be using this on cooldown even if you are maintaining already 3 stacks of Lacerate. We then will be dumping Rage, if that's what we want to do, on Maul, which does a mere 8,000 damage, 2.84 second cooldown, costing 20 Rage. Maul doesn't do that much damage in comparison to, say, Lacerate, which does like 3 times as much damage. So this, going full DPS mode, it's going to involve putting your Rage into Maul. That's not going to be a crazy increase in your numbers. Now, we also do have Thrashed. This is a 6-second cooldown. This strikes all enemies within 8 yards, dealing 2,700 bleed damage and applying Lacerate for an additional amount of bleed damage over 15 seconds. Now, I find that, of course, if you're in a single target situation even, so we'll go into single target, it makes sense to Lacerate, then Thrash, then Lacerate, which will actually have you at 3 stacks of Lacerate, which is pretty damn nice. So let's go and look at the actual gameplay. Oh, and also Moonfire is available for some reason. This does some damage instantly and also does 30,000 arcane damage over 12 seconds. Absolutely something you want to have active. So then, you'll keep your Starfall, 12 seconds. Did I say 15? Yeah, 12. You keep that up, then you want to build yourself up to 3 stacks of Lacerate. You want to use Mangle on cooldown because it is your most damaging ability and also generates the resource that you basically need to get stuff done. And that's really how this plays in terms of your basic rotation. What is the main thing you're going to be using that Rage on, though? It's going to be your various different defensive abilities, and your toolkit really is quite extensive. So let's just start off with Survival Instincts. This is, in many ways, your most powerful defensive. So it's a 2-minute recharge, reduces all damage taken by a flat 50% for 6 seconds, 2-minute cooldown, and 2 charges. So that is extremely powerful. You'll be saving that up quite a bit, I imagine. We've then got Bark Skin. The Druid skin becomes as tough as bark, reducing all damage taken by 20% for 12 seconds. While protected, damaging attacks will not cause spellcasting delays, and it's usable while stunned, frozen, incapacitated, feared, sleeped, and in all forms. It also, as you can see, doesn't cost any resources whatsoever, and because it lasts for 12 seconds, that's quite a lot of absorbed damage. However, you can see it is significantly less potent than Survival Instincts for just, reducing the amount of overall damage you're taking, and also messed up the look of my Druid. We move on to 2 other abilities which both cost Rage, Iron Fur and Mark of Ursol. Iron Fur is 45-yard range, 1-second cooldown, increases armor by 100% for 6 seconds, multiple uses of it overlap. So, if you anticipate taking physical damage, you want to be using Iron Fur. If you anticipate a ridiculous amount of physical damage, then you probably want to work your way up to 100 Rage, and then use 2 Iron Furs before you take that hit from a boss. Of course, a lot of boss abilities are extremely predictable, so you can plan around that. We then have Mark of Ursol, 45-yard range. Range? No, 45 rage cost. This reduces the magical damage taken by 30% for 6 seconds. However, unlike Ironfur, it does not overlap. So basically, it is your magic damage version of Ironfur. Both of these count as active mitigation, as does Barkskin and Survival Instincts. The 4 of those basically make up your active mitigation toolkit. We then have 2 additional survival abilities. We've got Frenzied Regeneration, costs 10 rage, 20-second recharge, 2 charges, heals you for 60% of all damage taken in the last 6 seconds, over 6 seconds, and a minimum of 5% of your maximum health. I see that as being a little bit similar to like the current Bloodstrike, where the amount that it heals you is based, or not Bloodstrike, Deathstrike, where the amount that it heals you is based on the amount of damage that you've recently taken. So that's quite nice. Of course, if you were to use, say, Survival Instincts, which means you don't take that much damage, and then Frenzied Regeneration, maybe that wouldn't be the most efficient thing. So the usage and how you sort of tie all these abilities together will certainly vary from time to time. As an example, Survival Instincts reduces all damage taken by 50%, so you could probably, if you were taking a ridiculous amount of damage from something, you could do this and an Iron for that, and a Mark of Ursol, because Survival Instincts doesn't cost rage. Of course, we need to see what the boss design is like, and Blizzard have indeed posted a large forum post in which they said that they're making active mitigation comparatively less powerful, so they can shift a little bit more of the responsibility onto healers. That is a topic, though, that will probably develop as the alpha progresses. And finally, we've got Rage of the Sleeper, channel the Rage of Ursoc, reflecting 33% of damage to opponents and increasing rage and healing received by 33%. So if I were just to use this, I kind of grow all big, and it lasts for 18 seconds. So that's definitely quite powerful. You're getting a lot more rage, a lot more healing. Basically, this is you just going beast mode for a while. Let's have a look at the talents. So then, we start off with the Brambles. Sharp Brambles protect you, absorbing and reflecting up to 900 damage from each attack. Then we've got the interesting one, as far as I'm concerned, at least from maybe a leveling perspective. Pulverize, a devastating blow that consumes 3 stacks of Lacerate to do 22,000 physical damage and reduce damage taken by 15% for 12 seconds. So the thing about that is you can pretty much maintain 100% uptime. So let's run up to this target. I will do a Lacerate, then a Thrash, then a Lacerate, which gets me up to 3 stacks super quickly. We then use Pulverize, which, did a whole bunch of damage, gave me this buff here. I'm now back at 3 stacks of Lacerate. I can Pulverize again, so you can actually have a continuous 100% uptime of having 15% less damage taken via this talent, making it, I think, very powerful. We then have Blood Frenzy. Lacerate also generates 2 rage each time it deals damage over time, while at maximum stacks. That's going to give you more resources to play with, so, it's funny, I find that in a purely damage-dealing context, you don't need that extra rage, but if you're going to be using lots of, say, Ironfurs, especially if you're planning on double stacking them on a boss that's primarily physical damage, then, honestly, the more rage you can get, the better. We move on to the 30 tier, Guttural Roars. This increases the radius of Stampeding Roar by 200%. Same goes for Incapacitating Roar too. This reduces the cooldown of Stampeding Roar by 50%. We then have Displacer Beasts, which I believe is pretty much the same thing, where you will teleport forward and end up in your cat form. We then have Wild Charge. This gives you a movement ability that varies from shapeshifted form. So if you're not shapeshifted, you fly to your ally's position. If you're in bear form, you charge to the enemy, immobilizing them for 4 seconds. Which is kind of funny because we've already got, say, Skull Bash, which is a 13-yard range charge. But of course, this is a 25-yard range charge, which looks something like that. Skull Bash also acts as your interrupt. Let's get back to the talents. So that's that covered. Let's move on to the 45 tier. We can get either Balance, Feral, or Restoration Affinity. What this does is gives you access to some more abilities which are usable in the correct form for whatever affinity. So as an example, if I take Feral Affinity, I get Shred, Rip, Ferocious Bite, and Swipe. So it gives me the very core of the DPS rotation of a Feral Druid. If I head into Balance, then I get my basic Balance toolkit. Though, of course, you're not going to be a full Balance Druid. You're not going to have all of their cooldowns and their super powerful passives and things like that. It just means that you can kind of you can be a tank that does a little bit of damage if you change into a form, which I don't know if that's the most useful thing. They do also have a passive, so Balance Affinity increases the range of all attacks by 5 yards, which, is quite strange for melee attacks. I don't think that makes much sense. But anyway, there's that. We've got Feline Swiftness, which comes with Feral, which makes you run faster. And then, this is what tanks will probably go for, Restoration Affinity, because it gives you Ysera's Gift, which heals you for 3% max health every 5 seconds. But if you're at full health, then that heal will spill over to a friendly target who has been damaged. So let's go back into Restoration and look at the 60 tier. We've got Mighty Bash, 50-second cooldown. You invoke the Spirit of Ursoc, and basically it stuns your target for 5 seconds. That's what that looks like. Not the most interesting spell effect. Well, it looks kind of cool. Maybe it just needs better sound assets. We've then got Mass Entanglement. Roots your target in place for 20 seconds and spreads to additional nearby enemies. Damage caused may interrupt the effect. Usable in all shapeshift forms. So I'll just show you what this is like. And, nearby things will be affected by the entanglement. Lovely stuff. We move on to Typhoon. 30-second cooldown. Summon in Typhoon that strikes targets in front of the caster within 15 yards, knocking them back and dazing them. Obviously, you're not really going to be knocking back a training dummy, but you get the point. We move on to the 75 tier, and we're back onto useful abilities here. Soul of the Forest. Mangle generates 5 more rage and deals 15% more damage. We've then got Incantation Guardian of Ursoc. This is a new cooldown. I suppose yet again another defensive cooldown. An improved bear form that reduces the cooldown on all melee damage abilities and growl by 1.5 seconds. Also causes Mangle to hit up to 3 targets lasting for 15 seconds. Now, I did say that was more of a defense, that was, a defensive thing as well. Of course, this means you're generating significantly more rage. So I'll show you what that looks like, because more rage, of course, means more Iron Furs, more Frenzied Regeneration. Let's use that. And yeah, it completely messes up what my stuff looks like. But as you can see, I mean, the cooldowns are so damn low here. I can just spam this and get so much, rage back, which means I can, do my Iron Furs more, various different things like that. And I suppose from a DPS perspective, it also does make you a powerhouse. If you're doing a big group pull, you could take that and then, maybe use loads of Thrashes to quickly dot up a group of enemies, so that's quite good. We then have Galactic Guardian. Your damage has a 5% chance to trigger a Moonfire, and Moonfire also reduces the damage that enemies deal to you by 5%. Here's a funny thing. So if I go for Galactic Guardian, and I go for... which one is it? Pulverize, yeah. Then that is 15% less damage taken baseline from Pulverize, on top of 5% less from Moonfire. Well, okay, that's the enemy dealing 5% less damage to you, and then you taking 15% less damage, which I guess is a bit different. But still, you can stack these up to be a little bit more passively tanked, I suppose. Anyway, let's move on to the 90 tier. Earth Warden, every 6 seconds you gain a charge of Earth Warden, up to 3 charges. It is a passive ability. An Earth Warden will reduce the damage of the next auto attack you take by 30%. So, once again, if you take this, you're into more of a passively tanking build. And when I say passive tank, I don't mean it's like a... a passively tanked Drake in EVE Online, which just manages to completely survive all the way by itself. That was a terrible reference. Most of you probably haven't played EVE. Anyway, it just means you're taking a little bit less damage by your baseline. We move on to Guardian of Elune. Iron Fur and Mark of Ursol last an additional 2 seconds, and Frenzied Regeneration now heals for an additional 20%. That just makes your existing toolkit that little bit more shiny. And finally, Survival of the Fittest, which reduces the cooldowns of Bark Skin and Survival Instincts by 50%. I actually did the initial part of this video with that turned on. Survival Instincts is a 4-minute recharge per charge, and Bark Skin is 1.5 minutes. Anyway, we move on to the level 100 tier. So Rend and Tear. Lacerate also increases damage dealt to the target and reduces damage taken from the target by 2% per stack. Now, Rend and Tear isn't really something that goes well with Pulverize, because Pulverize does involve losing all of your stacks of Lacerate. So overall, it would still be to your benefit, because at least for some time you'll have the reduced damage taken from Rend and Tear, but overall, it's not really ideal. We've got Lunar Beam, which is another 1.5 minute cooldown. We will drag this onto my bar. So this will call down a beam every second that heals you for 12,000 and does some arcane damage to the enemies. So if we... where did I put that on my bar? There. So if I use that, Lunar Beam comes down. It heals me up, damages my target, pretty darn simple. And finally, Bristling Fur. You bristle fur, causing all attacks against you to generate rage for 8 seconds. Not necessarily a defensive cooldown, you know, this could be an offensive cooldown, but if you are taking loads of physical damage, you know, you're being attacked a lot, then, you know, you pop Bristling Fur, now you're getting loads of rage, meaning you can dump it into Iron Furs, which of course will be stacking on top of each other successfully. Yeah, so just to clarify, I suppose, for the defensive stuff, Survival Instincts is your big kind of oh shit moment ability. Bark Skin is somewhat similar. Big thing is it lasts for 12 seconds, so if there's a period of sustained damage, that's great. Then Iron Fur and Mark of Ursol are the ones you're going to be using day in, day out, all the time, as you, you know, want to take less damage. And of course, Frenzied Regeneration is in there for a little bit of health regeneration. Anyway, let's look at the artifact weapons. So, first of all, the weapon itself. Your melee abilities cause Blood Claws, dealing 2,000 damage over 15 seconds. Blood Claws also reduces damage dealt by 3% and stacks up to 5. So enemies will be dealing 15% less damage to you from this, potentially less damage to you from, you know, something like Rend and Tear. You're taking less damage from Pulverize and Galactic Guardian. Like, there's a lot of just inbuilt you take less damage here. Then it's actual, like, active abilities, Rage of the Sleeper, 1.5 second cooldown, Channel the Rage of Ursoc, reflecting 33% damage to opponents, and increasing rage, regen, and healing received by 33%. I've already covered that, actually. Then we've got Adaptive Fur. Elemental damage has a chance to trigger Adaptive Fur, reducing damage from that element by 20% for 15 seconds. Extremely situational. I don't know if that's the best designed thing. Not really that interested. Yeah, so we then got Embrace the Nightmare. While Rage of the Sleeper is active, which of course is your active ability from your artifact, you are immune to CC and deal 33% increased damage, generate 33% more rage, and leech 33% of your damage dealt. This just turns you, once again, into more of a powerhouse when you use Rage of the Sleeper. It's kind of like Super Rage of the Sleeper. We've then got Heart of the Woods. While Barkskin is active, you are embraced by the forests. The first 3 strikes that would deal more than 20% of your life are absorbed by the trees. So basically that is buffing up your Barkskin. Again, like with most of the artifacts, these are augments to your previous toolkit rather than really giving you something super amazing to play with. Additionally, their Mastery, which I think I forgot to cover, it increases their maximum health and healing received by 35% and attack power by 17%. Of course, those values depend on your amount of Mastery. And then their other passive, which is baseline, is Thick Hide, which reduces all damage taken by 10%. Everything else, though, is from talents. And you do have some other things, like you can, you know, hit Prowl, which is pretty cool. There's Stampeding Roar as well. Skull Bash, which I've already covered, but it's like a mix of a charge and an interrupt, which I think is very cool. Nice utility there. And we've got Entangling Roots as well. I think that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, and Growl is, you know, that's still your taunt. That's pretty much it for the Bearform Druid. Just a look at their overall toolkit. If you are a Bearform tank, then you will probably know what to make of all of this information in a raid context. I have not actually tanked with one of these before. I have dabbled around with the spec, but still, you know, I think with how things are designed in Legion, it's very easy to analyze a spec like this and see how it plays, and then equip people who are going to be playing it with the knowledge that they need to make decisions about the spec. That is it for me, guys. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.